So welcome to Grandad's Reviews, and today something different. You may have noticed just recently there's a lot of high-end cameras being released. Canon, Fuji, Sony, Nikon's come out with a new camera with amazing specs and also amazing prices. You go and have a look at your own bank balance and think, don't think I can afford anything like that just at the moment. So what I thought I'd do is have a look at two affordable cameras that you can get second hand. Now, one I'm very familiar with, one I'm not. And the two cameras in question is the X-T1, which I am very familiar with, and I've got a number of lenses for, and the Sony A77ii. Now the reason I picked this camera personally is because I've got a number of Minolta A mount lenses which I can use on this camera, and it'll work with the AF because this is an A mount camera. So I thought I'll give these two a go. So what we're going to do is I'm going to use the X-T1 and he's going to use the A77ii, and then during the shoot and what we're photographing we'll swap between the two of them. And the specs on the X-T1 are... the specs on the X-T1, I'll go through the specs. I have to read them out because memory's terrible these days. So the Fuji X-T1, price when new was £1,049 or $12.99. It was released in 2014. Really? Now you can pick these up for £200 to £300 on eBay. You may find them less depending on the condition. And lenses, again, you can pick some reasonably priced ones up, the XC line and such like. I know some of the higher quality ones are quite expensive, but yeah, and you can obviously adapt vintage lenses to them like I do. The main specs: sensor's a 16.3 megapixel sensor, APS-C. Okay. ISO range is 200 to 6400. We've got a shutter speed of 30 seconds to 4 thousandths of a second. The electronic viewfinder is a 2.36 million dot viewfinder, and the LCD on the back, which is only tiltable, is just over 1.04 million dots on the LCD. Fastest frame rate you're going to get out of it in stills, I'm not going to look at these for video, it's all stills, is 8 frames per second. We've got 49 point autofocus, which we've got spot autofocus, zone, great, and tracking with face and eye detection. So that's my specs on Fuji X-T1. So what are your specs on the Sony A77ii? Well, the specs on the A77ii that I'm going to use are, price when new, it was £1,299 or $16.99. Really? And it was released in 2014, the same as the X-T1. The sensor is a 24.3 megapixel sensor, and the ISO range on this is 100 to 25,600. Shutter is 30 seconds to 1/8 thousandth. That's great. The EVF is a 2.36 million EVF, really, dot EVF, and the LCD, which is tiltable, swivelable, everything you want to do with it kind of EVF, LCD, is 1.23 million dots. Frame rate, we can get 12 frames per second, but that does lock the aperture. Normal without the aperture being locked, I'm getting 8 frames per second. That's great. Got 79 points of autofocus, and I've got center, I've got wide, which does all of the spots, I've got zone, so I can move a zone around, I've got spot, Got a flexible spot, which means I've got a few dots around the spot. Got tracking and eye and face detection. So that's the specs. And what we're going to go out and do then? Well, what we're going to do, we're going to say, take both the cameras out. He'll shoot with the A77ii, I'll shoot with the X-T1, and then we'll swap over and see how we go. So let's go. Right, so we've now got the images into Lightroom. These are the X-T1 images I've got here. Some I've edited and some I haven't. So if we just have a quick look through some of these. This one was shot at ISO 800, 230mm, 6.7 1/1000 of a second. Zoom in, as you can see, it's not particularly sharp. I'll come to some of the others. That one there. It looks like at least the focus was quite accurate there. Not too bad. Some of these I've used the enhanced image setting in Lightroom. That was ISO 320. But all in all, going through these kite images, X-T1, yeah, got focus pretty good. Not bad at all. Quite pleased with the focus and the tracking on it. I didn't actually use the actual tracking part of the focus system. I just used the single square with continuous autofocus. The only issue I found with the 55 to 230 XC lens, the focusing wasn't the quickest on the planet, but once it got focus it did stick quite well. So these were the red kites. And then I went and just took some general images around my parents' garden. This is ISO 200, and I did an ISO test here. So we're starting at ISO 200, which is the base ISO on the X-T1. That's 400, 800, slightly move focus, 1600, 3200 and 6400, and to be honest, it's pretty good. I've done no editing to these images at all. These are the straight raw, straight out of the camera. So, you know, ISO noise seems to be quite good. We've done a landscape. This is ISO 200. Got some nice detail. ISO 200 again. Nice detail. The only thing you can comment on these really is when you get into like trees and that, where you got these leaves, Lightroom doesn't render them too brilliantly, but other than that they were quite good. Nice exposures, well balanced, very good. Alright, if we go to the A77, if we went to here, well, I did find the AF was a lot quicker than the Fuji in locking on, but ended up being less accurate for some reason. And this was right over the edge again. Similar kind of detail to the Fuji. We'll compare them in a second. These are ISO 800, misfocus there, ISO 400, ISO 320. A lot of noise even at 320. Can be sorted out in post. So it's ISO 320 again. So yeah, fors and against. I mean, obviously the lens I'm using is a bit older on the A77, but just the noise, that's ISO 800, very noisy. Normal viewing distances, they're fine. And then we had the shots in the garden. So here we have that same shot, ISO 200. And we did the same ISO test here. So this is ISO 100 base, 200, 400, 800, you start to see the noise come in now, 1600, a lot of noise, 3200, and then 6400 is basically, yeah, it is not as good as the Fuji landscape. I've obviously got some dirt on the mirror, but it just doesn't seem as sharp right across. And I think something you can probably start to notice is that the exposures are different. So if we go into both of them, we'll do this flower. So this is the Fuji. So we've got the Fuji on the left, Sony on the right, 2.8, 2.8, ISO's 200, ISO's 200. Alright, the lens is slightly different. The Fuji's picked 1,100th and the Sony 2,500. Obviously the colours are different. That's that one. There's a Fuji of that one. And this is, so we've got the Fuji on the left again, Sony on the right, ISO 200, 2.8, and they actually picked the same shutter speed. Sony focused slightly on a different section of the flower, but if you can see, this Fuji is a lot cleaner in these out of focus areas. Now the biggest tell for Lightroom with Fuji files against Sony. So we've got Fuji on the left, Sony on the right. Again, Sony's picked a different shutter speed, and it was probably metering more for the sky than the thing. But the leaves are so much better on the Sony, and on the Fuji they look a little plasticky. The trunk doesn't seem to be much difference, but the leaves is a big difference. And there's the church. Fuji on the left, 3200. Sony picked 5000. And I don't know, on this one, the Sony nailed focus better than the Fuji. So they both got their fors and against on the focusing. And let's do one more here. Let's just do another flower. So that's the Fuji. Again, different metering and different noise. Look how smooth the Fuji is compared to the Sony at ISO 400. And the focusing just seems so different between the two of them as well. And just this one here, which is a one just to show how much the actual metering is so much different. With the Fuji, it seems to be bringing up the shadows more, whereas the Sony's bringing down the highlights. I think if the Sony metered the same as the Fuji, there'd be less noise in the shadows. Again, the Fuji nailed focus better, and it's got more details in the shadows because it's done that. But if you look at the grass, how much difference the rendering is for the Sony file to the Fuji file. I'd say the Sony seemed obviously focused on the building, even though I was focusing on this. And the Fuji looks a little bit, I don't know, plasticky. So I think the strengths in both systems. So looking at both systems and my thoughts on the handling of that, my other self isn't here, he's busy doing something else. But when I was using the Sony, it was a nicer handling camera. The grip was better, there was a more solid control of it, especially with a long lens. I found the autofocus to be quicker, but not necessarily as accurate. I found the Fuji autofocus, even though it was a bit slower, it was more accurate and it locked onto what you actually were expecting it to lock on, whereas the Sony, it seemed to drift a bit. As regarding the image quality, if you keep the Sony ISO low, then the image quality is just as good as the Fuji. Once you start getting over 400 ISO though, then the Fuji wins hands down, and I'd quite happily use the Fuji up to 6400, where the Sony would definitely not, nowhere near that. Control wise, I don't think there's a lot in it. Once you learn what the buttons do and the differences in how they work, there's not a lot in it. Even the Sony menu system, even though there was lots of it, it wasn't difficult. I don't think the steady shot helped a great deal. I couldn't really notice a difference with it on or off, to be honest. There was a slight difference looking through the viewfinder when it was on and you were half pressing and aiming at something. You could just see it steady the actual image. But all in all, I think both cameras are excellent for the price. You don't have to buy or think you've got to buy these high expensive cameras that's being released. Something like this, if you just want it for your hobby, just general photography, doing the kids, flowers or anything like that, then yeah, I'd be quite happy to use either camera. And the advantage that Sony's got is that there's a lot of cheap Minolta A mount lenses out there, and even Sony A mount lenses. There's still quite a good collection, whereas with the Fuji all the lenses are current, and so the prices are relative to that. So that's my look at the X-T1 against the A77 Mark II. I don't think there's any clear winner in this. Each has its strengths and weaknesses. Both will serve you well. Just depends on which way you want to go and what prices you can get. So if you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. If you want to see more videos like this, hit the subscribe button. If you want to be notified, hit that bell button. Till next time, see you later.